I was buying fabric in New York City this weekend, and it got me thinking about the first time I went to the garment district to go shopping and how many mistakes I made and how much money I wasted just because I didn't really know how it worked and I didn't know what to expect. I know this is a different type of video for my channel, but I really want to make something that would hopefully help other people get the most out of the garment district without making all the silly mistakes that I made when I first started going in. This isn't a guide in the literal sense that I will be walking you through the garment district, but I will be sharing lots of tips and recommendations to make going into the garment district a lot easier and hopefully make your trip more successful. I'll also be talking a little bit about how I buy fabric and what my lists look like and stuff like that. So if you're just interested in my process, even if you aren't necessarily going into the garment district, you might like this video as well. So the first thing is that the garment district is really different from going to Joann's or going to Fabricland. The differences just go on and on and on. But the main one is how much selection you have. You go from having 3 different types of taffeta that each come in 5 different colors to having 15 types of taffeta that come in 50 different colors each. It's ridiculous how much variety you have compared to the normal store you would go into. And sometimes the stores are really cluttered. There are aisles that are 15 inches wide that you have to squeeze through to look at all the materials. Other times the fabric goes all the way up to the ceiling, and then there are ropes hanging from the ceiling that have more fabric hanging on them. And those types of fabrics go from wool suitings to wools you could use to make coats to the most delicate silks you can imagine. The price range is massive too. You will have stores that sell $3 a yard polyester taffeta, $30 a yard silk iridescent taffeta. So there's a big range whether you're just starting out and you want cheap junky materials or if you're making couture gowns. They have everything, and pretty much every store is like that. You will get that big price range and you will get that large range in types of material. So because of that, if you're anything like me, if you like fabric and you like making things out of fabric, you'll probably want to buy everything. But I would highly suggest not doing that. Pacing yourself is really, really important because that excitement and desire to buy everything you touch that you know you can use is probably how you're going to feel in every single store. So unless you see something that's absolutely perfect for what you're working on or something you know you can't live without, I suggest putting it back and waiting until you've seen what the other stores have to offer, because you might find something you like better, or you might find the same item at a lower price. A lot of stores buy from the same manufacturers and wholesalers, so you will end up seeing a lot of the same fabrics in different stores, and there might be a big price range in those fabrics. Like some stores might have jersey for $4 and others might sell it for $7, even though there isn't a big quality difference. If you don't want to forget the fabric you found that you really love but don't want to buy in that moment, ask for a swatch of it. Stores will usually give you a couple swatches even if you don't buy anything, and then they'll staple them to their business card so you can go back for it. And if you want to remember the price and compare it to the pricing in other stores, you can write down the price on the back of the business card. I've done that many times and ended up going back to those fabrics, and the store owners have had no problem with it whatsoever. So that brings me on to my next thing. When it comes to swatches, bring something to store them in, especially if you're trying to match swatches to other fabrics you have at home or fabrics you bought for other projects. It makes everything so much easier. My swatch case is an emptied out watercolor pencil tin, but a makeup bag or even just a plastic bag works just fine. And collect swatches of fabrics as you buy them, not just of fabrics that you might end up going back for. Because if you're trying to match trim to a costume you've bought fabric for in the same day, it's a lot easier to have a little swatch you can hold up as you go through the trim store than lugging around a 4-yard piece of fabric. And trust me, I've been that person. I put all my swatches on swatch cards and I cut these out of watercolor paper before I go into New York City, and then I just put the name of the costume in big letters on the back side, and then I have it written smaller on the front side, and this is the side that I staple all the swatches to. And I collect swatches throughout the day, and then I know what I bought, and it just makes it easier to find other fabrics that match them. This is for my Burgundian dress, this is for another project. You get the idea. The next thing I think is really important is bringing a list. If you're just going in to browse and to see what you can find and to see what inspires you, then you don't really need a list. But if you're actually shopping for a specific project, you will want a list. I've been going to those stores for almost 3 years now, and I've been into each one far more than a dozen times, but I still get really overwhelmed and excited going into them, and it's easy for me to forget what I'm there for. I write out a list of all the projects I'm shopping for, and then I write out all the materials I will need for each project. And if I can, I try and guesstimate the amount of fabric I will need for each project, and I write that down too. It's enough of a challenge trying to decide on what fabrics you want for whatever you're trying to make. You don't need to sit there being stuck on how much you need of it too. So if you can figure that out beforehand, that's great. This is also really good for budgeting. You can write down how much you're willing to spend per yard on that fabric. I like to have a list that's done on paper so I can cross things off as I go, and then things I've already purchased won't be distracting me. But there have been a few occasions where I've lost my list, so now I also have a copy of the list that I type up in Notepad and load onto my phone. The next biggest difference between shopping in the garment district compared to Joann's or Fabricland or one of those stores is haggling. It's a thing there. It's expected. The price they give you originally isn't the price they actually think you are going to pay. Most of the fabrics don't have prices labeled on them, so you will have to ask an employee. This applies to most stores on all their by-the-yard merchandise. So it doesn't apply to like sequins and beads and buttons, but I found in every store I've ever been to that there's been a little bit, or a lot in some cases, of wiggle room on the prices. It's really pretty straightforward though. You know, they say it costs $18, you say I'm only willing to pay 10 and hope they meet you somewhere around 12 or 15 depending on what you're willing to pay. My mom finds it really embarrassing, but it is honestly so expected in those stores that it's not something to be ashamed of or shy about, because they know it's what people are going to do. And as I said, this applies to all the stores I've ever been into, but I'm sure there are some exceptions out there, and I'm very sorry if you walk into a store and try that and they like give you an evil eye look, because that has never ever happened to me. Everything in the garment district is usually priced like really well, and the prices are really low compared to what you're going to get in Joann's. But I do have some tips to get those prices to be even lower. And the first is that make sure you're talking to the owner of the store. Even though all employees tend to be educated on the merchandise, they won't necessarily know what the wholesale price is. But the owner who orders the fabrics from the wholesalers will know the profit margin, and they'll probably be willing to give you better deals because they know they can do that and still make money off of it. The more you buy at a store, the better prices they're going to give you. And to go along with that, the more yardage you buy of something in particular, the better the price will probably be on it. You'll ask for the price of something, and then they'll ask how much you're buying, because if you're buying 5 yards or 10 yards or 15 yards, they're probably going to give you a lower price. The other one that's really important, which isn't necessarily an option for everyone, is just going back to stores regularly. The people there have ridiculously good memory, and they will remember you, and they will remember everything you've ever bought in their store. And they're likely going to want to give you better prices if you shop there often, because you're a customer that they want to keep happy, so you will continue going back. And worst comes to worse, you can always ask for a cheaper option. I found a beautiful silk taffeta that I was just in love with, but I couldn't afford it, so I asked for a swatch, and in the next store I went into, they had something very similar that was $4 a yard instead of $22 a yard. It was polyester, not silk, but it had a similar texture to it and was the exact same color. So if something's way out of your budget and you know you can't haggle it down to a price you're comfortable paying, ask if they have something similar, or get a swatch and ask in other stores, because you never know, they might, and then you could save yourself some money. A general tip I would have is to watch them cut the fabric. And they cut fabric a little bit differently in the garment district. They usually just take a yardstick and then wrap the fabric around the yardstick and hack it off once they get to the amount you wanted to purchase. Not everyone is a super reliable businessman, so just make sure that you're getting the amount you're paying for and watch them as they cut it. And to go along with that, examine the fabric as they roll it out. I have bought dirty fabric, I have bought damaged fabric, I have bought fabric with holes in it. In every case that I've noticed fabric has some sort of damage, the people have been quite happy to give me an extra yard or two to make up for that, or completely cutting off that section and giving me more that's not damaged. But you do have to notice, because not everyone is nice enough to give you extra unless you notice. And I have definitely been a victim of that before, so just watch out for that. And another like don't get scammed type of deal is keep a list of how much you're spending as you go through the store. So if you're getting 6 different cuts of fabric, make sure you have how much each of those cuts costs written out. So by the time you go to pay, you know what the total should be. And if the total they give you is incorrect, you can go through it with them and make sure that you agree about what the price should be. This has happened once or twice to me where our prices have been $5 or $10 different. And I really do believe it was an honest mistake, but I was quite happy that I had it written down so I knew how much I was supposed to be paying. The final tip is that bring a tote bag or suitcase. I'm really super embarrassing. I bring a suitcase and I fill that with fabric as I go because it's a lot easier to pull fabric than it is to carry it. And most of the shop owners are quite content to keep that at the front while you browse around. If you don't want to be super embarrassing and carry a suitcase, at least bring a tote bag, especially if you're buying notions and lace and whatever. It's just a lot easier to be able to chuck it all into one large bag than to carry around lots of handles of these slippery plastic bags. And if it's raining or the weather isn't great, it's nice to be able to zip your fabric into a bag where you know it can't get wet. I think that's it, but before I get into recommendations, I want to give you the biggest, most important tip, and that is to have confidence. And that sounds really silly, but a lot of the people in the garment district are kind of pushy, and you will ask for the price of a fabric and they will get out their ruler and look like they're going to start cutting it for you. So just be confident in what you want and what you don't want, and don't let anyone push you into buying something or into cutting fabric that you don't want and you haven't asked them to cut for you. Of course, like, be a nice person, but also don't be afraid to be stern if they're trying to force something on you and you're uncomfortable with their tactics to get you to buy something. I was kind of shy at first, and that's definitely not a good attitude to have when you're in those shops and trying to buy stuff. And some store owners aren't pushy at all, and they're just really nice and they give you time to browse, and others see you looking at something for more than a minute and they start rolling it out for you. And the only way you can figure out what stores do that and what stores don't is by going in and going through the stores and figuring out what the staff is like in each shop. I think that's it for advice, but I do have some shop recommendations which I will go through. Most of the stores I go to are located on 38th and 39th Street before 7th and 8th Avenue. Those two streets are pretty much completely lined with fabric stores and trim stores. A lot of stores are closed on Sunday, and a lot of the trim and notion stores are closed on Saturday. So if you're going in, it's best to go in on a day that isn't a weekend, and if you do have to go in on a weekend, going in on a Saturday is definitely a lot better. A lot of the bead stores and a couple other neat trimming stores are on 38th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue. That's where Beads World is, and that's where a couple trim stores that I can't remember the name of but that I really like are. So I'd suggest just walking down those streets and seeing what you can find there, because pretty much every store is awesome. But a couple ones that I love more than others are, I believe it's pronounced Zara Fabrics or Zahar Fabrics, I'm not really sure, I will put the title here. This is my all-time favorite store. They just have a huge selection of everything you can imagine, and I always walk out with so much stuff from their store because they have really good deals and they have really good material, and the staff there is really nice. I like Amin Fabrics as well. It's kind of crowded, but they always have really good prices there, and the people there are always willing to try and find what you need. Hamad's Fabrics is really nice. It's huge. Like, you walk into that store and you think it's small, but it just keeps going and going. I get all my cotton sateen there. They have a really good selection of jerseys. They have a really good selection of taffetas and satins and chiffons, and they just have a lot to offer in that store. Diana's Fabrics is really nice too. I love the materials they have there, but the staff is kind of hit or miss. If you're speaking to one of the two owners, it's really great, but if they're busy and those guys aren't available, it's just kind of a crapshoot. It's really hard to access and to browse the fabrics without a little bit of help, since they have the stuff stacked quite high. I really like Daytona trims, I like Pacific trims, and I like High trimmings. Those are all good stores with a lot to offer. Fabrics for Less is sort of a junky, crowded store, but they have a lot of jersey, they have a lot of wool, they have a lot of home decor fabrics, and they're worth a little peek into as well if you don't mind crowded spaces. And one thing just to consider is that bigger stores aren't always better stores, because they have a lot more staff, they have a much bigger space to rent, they have just higher overhead costs in general, which is usually reflected in their fabric pricing. So even though Mood and M&J Trimmings are absolutely amazing, beautiful stores to walk through, the prices there usually aren't as great as the stores are. So I would really highly suggest walking through some of the smaller shops before going straight to those, because you might be surprised by how much the smaller shops have and how much the prices differ. I'm not super familiar with bead stores, but I would highly suggest going into Beads World. The prices aren't great, but the variety completely makes up for it. And I think that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. And I will be having a fabric haul from my most recent trip into New York City up later this week. So I hope you will stick around for that. I hope you have a really great day, and thank you so much for watching.